Hey out there, Tiny Desk people. Welcome back to another look at the readings for this coming Sunday and some initial thoughts on what a sermon might be on these texts. This Sunday is Lectionary 27C, and we're going to focus on the Gospel of Luke. I'm just going to quickly mention that the first reading, Habakkuk, includes the verse at the end, which was so central to Martin Luther's rethinking his understanding of the gospel. Look at the proud, their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. Hey there, Trish, glad you found us live. All right, so I'm going to read the gospel reading, but I'm going to start out by saying this is a difficult text to know how to translate for our context, because it uses the word doulos in Greek, which is either slave or servant or bond servant, and it's just not clear to me that it's helpful to translate it as slave because of the way we understand American chattel slavery versus the indentured servitude of the ancient world, and the connotation of slavery with racism, which is not the case in the ancient world. So I'm going to, the top here is the New Revised Standard Version, which we usually use in worship, but I'm going to read the Common English Version because it uses servant instead of slave, and I think it just helps get some of those issues which really aren't part of the text sort of out of our minds. So, Luke 17. The apostles said to the Lord, "Make our faith stronger." Jesus replied, "If you had faith no bigger than a tiny mustard seed, you could tell this mulberry tree to pull itself up, roots and all, and to plant itself in the ocean, and it would. If your servant comes in from plowing or from taking care of the sheep, would you say, 'Welcome, come on in and have something to eat'? No, you wouldn't say that. You would say, 'Prepare me something to eat. Get ready to serve me so I can have my meal. Then later you can eat and drink.' Servants don't deserve special thanks for doing what they are supposed to do. And that's how it should be with you. When you've done all you should, then say, 'We are merely servants, and we have simply done our duty.'" All right. There's a section of chapter 17. We're not hearing the first four verses, which have to do with the disciples asking about forgiveness. So it's not clear in this whole first section of chapter 17 how these pieces are related, if at all. Are these sayings of Jesus that are just kind of assembled together? And therefore, we don't have to figure out what one has to do with the other? Or are they purposely connected in the order they are, so that we have to kind of make sense of the whole? It's not clear to me which way to go. Because if the first part, verses 1 to 4 that we didn't read, are talking about the disciples asking about forgiveness, and then Jesus goes on to say, and then they say, "Make our faith stronger," or in the New Revised Standard, "increase our faith." Is that about having the faith to forgive? Or is it simply not connected and it's just about having faith? Now in Matthew, when they ask about wanting to have their faith increased, it's in the context of a healing, really an exorcism in the story, that they were unable to perform. And so they say, "Increase our faith." And Jesus says, you just have to have faith the size of a mustard seed. So this is a different context with the same saying. So what do we do with it? I don't know. And then the last section here seems completely disconnected from what we just heard. First part is about faith the size of a mustard seed. The second part is about a servant coming in and not kind of taking the place of the let's see, they don't use the word master here, so it's you. Um, it just, simply saying we just did what we're supposed to do. Are these two things connected? Maybe, but it's not clear. So what's interesting to me about the part about faith is the apostles say, make our faith more, bigger, stronger. And Jesus kind of rejects the whole idea that somehow it's about having faith that gets bigger and stronger. He turns it on its head and said, you only need faith the size of a mustard seed. And you can do what great things you need to do. And of course, the image of the mulberry tree being pulling itself up by the roots and planting itself in the ocean is, to me, rather comical. So maybe we shouldn't take this whole saying in too heavy a tone. Maybe it's meant to tell us to lighten up. And if faith is not about quantity, what is it about? And I think that's what Jesus is trying to help them rethink their question, rethink their whole approach. Maybe they thought as apostles, well, they should have bigger faith than anyone else. Or maybe they wanted to get a trophy or a plaque at the end of the day for having the strongest faith. And Jesus has just kind of thrown that whole thing aside. So that faith is not about quantity, it's about quality. It's about the kind of relationship of trust, sort of very deep, sustaining trust that we have in God that enables us to do the things that God calls us to do. So it's not about quantity, I think, because to say, so you could hear the text this way. If you had faith no bigger than a tiny mustard seed, and therefore Jesus is insulting them and saying, their faith is even smaller than that? Come on, they just don't get it. I don't think that's the point. I think he's trying to say, don't worry about how much faith you have. Think about how faith connects you to God, and get yourself out of the picture. Which is why the second part might be connected, because now he's saying, okay, so he's calling his apostles, his disciples, to do the work of the kingdom and to be dedicated to it, but then not to expect trophies or rewards when they do it. So he says, well, if a servant comes in, they should simply say, we're merely servants. We did what we were supposed to do. We don't need any special recognition. We don't need rewards. We're doing what we're supposed to do because it's not about the recognition and the rewards. It's about the relationship we have with the one who sends us out to do it. So again, it's about getting yourself out of the way in your understanding of your faith. And very often we think about our life of faith as kind of centered in us and what we're trying to believe, or the kind of depth of spirituality we're trying to have, which is fine, which is great to have. But ultimately it gets in the way. It becomes self-serving. It becomes maybe deceptive to us to put that much on ourselves, which is why the Habakkuk reading that Martin Luther discovered is so powerful and refreshing, because it says the righteous live by faith, not by their own worth or righteousness or accomplishment, but by a deep, abiding, trusting relationship with God. And that's true righteousness, you might say. So I am hesitant to use the translation that has all this slave language on Sunday. I think I'm going to substitute for this common, contemporary English version. because that just raises all kinds of issues that I think are distracting from the text. But I'm wondering what you hear when you hear slave language, and am I overthinking it, or is it like, yeah, this is not helpful? Servant language has its own complications, I suppose, but I don't know that there's anything wrong with saying somebody is serving someone else. That in and of itself should be okay. It's depending on whether that person is given a level of dignity and respect and humanity in their servanthood. Back to the issue about getting yourself out of the way. This request to make our faith bigger, stronger, better, could easily tie into the prosperity gospel thing that's so popular in American evangelicalism. And, like saying, if you just get your faith big enough, you'll get everything you want. So just believe harder or try harder or, give more to the church, whatever it is. And, certain preachers will play into that. And the problem with that is it sends people, I think, in the opposite direction of what Jesus is trying to do here. And certainly what Martin Luther was doing with Habakkuk and other texts, it sends you into the direction of focusing on yourself. So what if faith is about simply giving up, focusing on ourselves? Not because we aren't important or loved, but because we are so loved and so in relationship with the holy that that just becomes a distraction to really living the life God has called us to live. A life of loving our neighbor, a life of caring for one another, of enjoying what God has given us to enjoy, because part of our human calling is to enjoy life as God gave it to us. So getting ourselves out of the way is a really tricky thing, because then you can get stuck even in the idea of getting yourself out of the way. It becomes very self-referential and self-defeating. So to me, it's really about just every day tapping into that faith is about a deep, abiding, trusting relationship, which is not even a relationship I created. It was one given to me so that I could trust in it. Because if I had to create it or manipulate it or get it to continue to grow, it would be a hopeless cause. But when I know that this relationship called faith is a given, then the more I can trust in it and let go and sort of fall into it, the more I'm able to be open to God's calling to be an instrument of God's love. Let's see, U.S. slavery changed as time went on. The closest analogy is Spartan. I can't read that. Or maybe the tin mines. So yeah, using the word slave invites us to misunderstand both Scripture and U.S. slavery. So this has actually been my other hesitancy to use the word slave, is that we lose track of how uniquely horrible American slavery was compared to many ancient practices of indentured servitude, both because of its racism and because of property ownership approach to a human being, and it's just sheer violence. So yeah, I think I try to keep that distinction without sounding like we're simply accepting or justifying the whole notion of indentured servitude that exists in Scripture, and not being also critical about that economic relationship that leads to people getting trapped in debt and in servitude. So that's not great either, but it's a significant degree different from what we understand slavery to be in this country's history. Prosperity gospel always seems to me to be Arminianism, as though you can buy faith through works. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that's why it's so anti-gospel, to think that if we can just believe more, just really, really trust in Jesus, God is going to give us all this material wealth blessing. It's just so anti-gospel. It's like, where did it even come from? Well, I did a class on this, on mixology and theology, a couple years ago on prosperity gospel, and we drank the very enjoyable French 75 cocktail to that one. But it came from somewhere. It came from late 18th, early 19th century evangelicalism, in particular preachers, and it just spread around. So the apostles maybe are trying to buy into something like that. It's anachronistic to say because it wasn't the prevailing theology then. It didn't have a label. But they're still trying to buy into something like they want to be able to be more. And the gospel is all about kind of saying it's okay to be less. It's okay to just be exactly the small thing that you are, you mustard seed person. I'm mixing up that metaphor there, but that's okay. Be less, because that is more than enough for God. That's very freeing. And so I'm going to contemplate, what does it mean to give up making ourselves the center of our project? What does it mean what is the good news in being less? Less than we think we need to be, not less than we truly are. Not less than our true selves, but simply being our true selves, and trusting that that is enough for God. That's perhaps faith in this sense. So I'm going to ponder that, and hopefully it'll be helpful. Now, this Sunday is also our St. Francis Blessing of the Animals Sunday. It's interesting that the parable, or not really parable, but that the metaphors Jesus uses are nature-oriented, which is often the case. So that gives an interesting sort of thread with St. Francis Sunday. But I'm probably not going to make that the focus of the sermon. But, it's of all the saints in 2,000 years, Francis stands out for a lot of people for his humility, for his love of caring for the poor, and his love of creation. So we're going to focus on that a little bit, as well as whatever pets anyone brings, we will bless, or photographs can be blessed, or just blessed through prayer, because these beautiful creatures mean so much to us, and the relationships are very real. All right, so that's what I've got for you today. Just a quick thought on what does it mean to have faith without it being quantity, but rather quality. Hope that's a helpful thing to stir up your thinking about your own faith and what it might mean and what you might be trying to turn it into that you don't need to. And we'll see where it goes. We have a couple things happening. I will have my next adult class on church standing in the gap, how to have difficult conversations. We had the first one last night, so next Tuesday is the next one. That's on Zoom. A week from Sunday, we have a guest preacher, former vicar Alex LaChapelle. He was vicar number 46 in 2012, and it's going to be great to have him back and hear about the many things he's done in ministry in these 10 years, and enjoy his preaching. And then the week after that, we have another guest preacher now scheduled. That's Barry Smith, who's the executive director of Micah 6 Ministries. So we look forward to hearing all those people. And I look forward to getting to sit back and listen to some great preaching. So thank you for joining me. Hope I get to see you sometime soon, whether online or in person. And peace.